Hey, sorry, it's been a really long time since I've done this, but it's been a really busy fall, which is a good thing, I guess, for what I do. I'm going to take a page out of my book called Rise from In Hiatus Studios. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of my process in building a scene using Clip Studio Paint, which is my new substitute for Photoshop. I'm going to lay down some quick perspective lines, which I used to use a ruler for, but I don't really have the time for anymore. I can pretty much eyeball it from this point. Especially doing what I do, I have to lay down perspective lines for most of the pages that I do. So usually eyeballing it does the job just fine. So I'm going to put in some opaque layers just to push forms back into space a little bit, which is my main subject, which is going to be a set of ruins. And then I'm going to lay down some shadow just to block in some of the foreground figures. And now that I have that, I'm going to go in and I'm going to take my opaque paint. I'm going to use a little bit of watercolor too, to basically treat this digital painting like a sculpture and chisel out the forms that I want to create as I build the ruins for this church, which is what I was surrounded with when I went to Italy twice now. I love that place, mostly because when you're surrounded by the art, you really soak in the mathematics of it all and the aesthetics of it all. And it's really exciting to bring that into my work now, because now the experience of it all is really useful in just kind of organically moving through this process of using the vocabulary of churches and that kind of artwork, especially in a scene like this. So as I do this, I have to carefully weigh out the primary light source, which is a campfire in the middle of these ruins. And as the light is coming from inside, I have to build the shadow on the outside of all the walls opposite from that light source, while of course I begin bringing in some texture and detail into the various forms that I am starting to shape or mold out of this piece of clay, as I like to call it. So as I go in, and those of you that have been to a lot of the cathedrals, you'll notice that this isn't really following a specific floor plan. There's a fair amount of invention goes into work like this, and this rises from a projected future, which means that I get to play around a bit. So when I do this, I usually tell myself a story about how that church got to be the way it is, or whatever form or whatever building it is. And that's what's fun about this process, as long as, of course, I follow the light rules, which is paying attention to the light that I've created, as well as all the perspective lines, to make sure that the building at least feels grounded and feels real. So I basically go from place to place, and I try to evenly move across the painting as much as possible, just so that one area doesn't get too much attention. Because if you look at it, you want to make sure that it's even throughout. I basically get to play. I've already written all the rules, so now I get to go in and tell little stories as I describe to myself how it's come to be the way it is. Now I'm going to go into the other side, and I'm going to go from room to room. The fun part about telling myself the story is then I get to also, while I build the church up, get to knock it down. I get to destroy some of the parts that I've built up, all the while using reference pictures to use the vocabulary of the architecture to refer to different times of history, but at the same time try to make the church as timeless as possible. So now I'm going to take a multiply layer. I'm going to add some deep blues to lay down the basic shadow structure. Of course, putting the shadow down on all walls and rooms opposite from the main light source to create the contrast. And then I'm going to use a second multiply layer to do some fill shadow. Right before, of course, which is the fun part, is where I'm going to go in and create the bounce light coming from the moon up above, which is what makes a nocturne like this really fun to do, because it makes the form really pop out and makes it feel really grounded, like it's being bathed in the moonlight. Now, just like any other sculpture, I'm going to sharpen the edges, and I'm going to paint out the contours of it, so it makes the shape pop out yet even more, right before I go in and put in some light fog, just to give it some ambiance and some atmosphere. It's really important to go in and put in some forms, basically paint out the figures in the foreground who are watching guard over these ruins. They're basically like gargoyles perched on this cliffside. And it's really important to paint them in even though I'm not done with the church, because I want to make sure that I don't go spending an hour on something underneath when I'm basically going to be blocking with these figures, because time management is really important, especially when this is just one panel of, 9 that I have to do for this one page. So now that I have something for them to look at, I can really just kind of go in and map out where their eyes would be or what they would be focusing on. Thanks so much for joining me, and I hope you got a taste of how I build a scene using perspective and light, and can't wait to show you the next one. Really appreciate it. Have a good one.